Welcome, Summoners, to Vision Denial. My name is Sam, and for this particular week, the Swiss stage first rigmarole is over. We say goodbye to two more teams. Lane swap meta doesn't seem dead at all. And is there still hesitation to what a new meta would look like, or do we just add sprinkles of new things all around? All that and more in this week's Vision Denial. Let's go. Welcome to everyone who is new here. If you are new, I'm Sam. I take a look at all of the best of fives throughout every playoffs, every series that's going on in games during international tournaments, and we take a look at them, break them down, review them, and also do weekly thoughts on the goings-on of the meta and competitive spirits on the international scale. First thing on the docket, let's review our series and our games so far from the Swiss stage. We also say goodbye to, unfortunately, Mad Lions Koi and Pain Gaming. Both teams I kind of expected to end around-ish here, or if not here in the next round. But stings nonetheless, depending on how you view it. But before we get into those, let's get into the rigmarole of the actual individual games and best of threes that we witnessed this week. If you're wondering about this format, I also have a TikTok link down below that I post these as I have seen them once they've been done and seen and gotten the chance to be edited. So if you want to see these ahead of time, you can check that out for all of the goodness that it is. But without further ado, let's take a nice review of the Swiss stage, week 1. Clean, but not as clean as one would hope. Mad Lions find some solid early proactive macro play, making it a promising start with a lot of punish and tempo play to boot. But the coordination is not quite there. The tempo and pace are lost very quickly, and priority/targeting needed a lot of work. And if they want to be able to get out of the Swiss stage, they gotta fix it. BD for their part show some textbook League of Legends, really leaning into their team fighting and macro strengths, never letting up even after moments of fumbling. Although the amount of leads they gave over early is a little concerning, and we'll see if this trend towards something dire against more capable teams. But for now, it was easy to make up with large differences in team fighting ability. My MVP for this game has been for the map pressure and team fight success he applied. This was round 0-0 of the Swiss stage. Mad Lions Koi, 3rd seed of the LCC, versus BD Gaming, 1st seed of the LPL. There is such a thing as too much patience. T1 show a masterclass in macro play, especially early into the game. Strong lane swap, ballooning of leads, tempo control. It seemed for, at least from minute 1, that they would have the game locked in. That said, the hesitation around certain skirmishes and neutrals really hurt them in this game. Top Esports, for their part, never hesitated to contest anything and called their opponents' bluffs masterfully. With some stronger coordination and a solid sense of their win condition, this game was tense but a well-earned victory for Top. I am concerned about how much tempo they let go, but this wasn't an issue for this particular game. My MVP for this game is Jackula for the continuous damage and output and positioning. This is round 0-0 of the Swiss stage. T1, 4th seed of the LCK versus Top Esports, the 2nd seed of the LPL. Good old-fashioned standoff. Weibo Gaming find a lot of solid moments to contest with and create strong skirmishing, really playing into their excellent coordination and momentum. But at no point did we see control of the tempo or pace of this game, allowing only little moments to answer or be punished with their lack of, honestly, just any answers of plays. Now Gen G, for their part, play out an excellent macro game and really playing into their late game compositional strengths. Some very strong understanding of their win conditions, and overall, just what we expect from them. Now that said, there are some, honestly, too many moments where they don't play with the control of the tempo or pace, opting to handshake scaling for both sides. Now, it works out for now, but questionable as to why one would take this kind of risk, especially with a team of this kind of caliber. My MVP for this game is Chovy for his excellent late game team fighting. This is Stage 00 of the Swiss stage, Weibo Gaming, Seed 4 of the LPL versus Gen G, Seed 2 of the LCK. It's just an unnecessary amount of chaos. Fnatic find moments of brilliance with late game skirmishing around neutrals and properly calling out D+'s hesitation, but that was after a lot of lackadaisical plays in the early game with no intentions to play towards their win conditions or even any proactivity, so to speak. This has to be corrected if they want a chance to move forward in this tournament. D+, for their part, show their strengths and weaknesses as expected. Some strong vision, incredible early gameplay for proactivity and neutral setups, but then the mid to late game rolls around and there is so much hesitation, it's kind of baffling. And they almost lost the game because of this particular issue, and they won't get this kind of opportunity going forward in this Swiss stage. My MVP for this game is Showmaker, who managed to be the most consistent point of pressure for his team. This is round 0-0 of the Swiss stage, Fnatic, the second seed of the LEC, versus D+ Kia, the third seed of the LCK. You can't give away control like that, honestly. Team Liquid held some strong early to mid gameplay, really building up to their win conditions, neutral control, strong tempo, but their late game woes come to bite them again in the butt as they slow down and allow their opponent the chance to not just scale, but also take control back of the tempo and pace of the game. LNG, for their part, responded to the early plays very well, contesting when it made sense and really punishing once leads had been established. Their coordination and late game macro really propelled them in the right direction, but some strange overreach created space for their opponent that stronger teams will take advantage of in the future much better. My MVP for this game is Hung for the amount of space he created for his team. This was Stage 0-0 of the Swiss stage, Team Liquid Honda, the second seed of the LCS, versus LNG Esports, the third seed of the LPL. This is what a macro diff can look like. The Talons show an incredible early game approach from neutrals to skirmishing and map control, but their approach was also slow, giving a lot of space for their opponent to take some form of control. If there was a little bit more pressure early in, there could have been a different look to this game. Humble Life on their end gave up a lot more than expected in the early game, especially given how well they played that stage, usually at least. But as the mid game kicked in, a huge amount of control was taken back, strong skirmishing and coordination coupled with incredible ballooning of their leads, and we have the scary team we expected from them all along. Let's just see if they are more consistent going forward. My MVP of this game is Doran, whose presence was unanswerable. This is round 0-0 of the Swiss stage, Paris Saint-Germain Talons Esports, the first seed of the PCS, versus Humble Life Esports, the first seed of the LCK. Calm, cool, and collected. GAM Esports' early game approach was well thought out and applied, but the pace and tempo of the game was just much too slow. We never got to see their coordination or much of their macro as they let their opponents slowly scale and become a huge problem. FlyQuest, for their part, understood their win conditions, never letting their opponent in or holding any control at any given point, and properly scaled in a way that is overwhelming even in a game as slow as this was. My main concern, however, from FlyQuest is how much they gave up around neutral objectives and how stronger their team would have been if they took advantage of such a slow tempo of game to punish them at every corner, not just trying to get things in the early game. My MVP of this game is Bippo for how much he shut down GAM's momentum. This is round 0-0 of the Swiss stage, GAM Esports, the first seed of the VCS, versus FlyQuest, the first seed of the LCS. The slowest form of bullying you can see. Pain Gaming try their damnedest and hold a very strong read on how to approach their win conditions and that of their opponents. The struggles don't come from their coordination or microplay, but that of their macro play, as they get outmaneuvered around the map, and if this is a sign of things to come, it doesn't look good for how this team will match up against the others in the Swiss stage. Now G2, for their part, hold incredible macro at all stages of the game, some strong understanding of their win conditions, and just some solid fundamentals all around. If there's any concerns that exists from this game, it's from the strange micro errors and very slow pace of the game. This game should have ended 5 to 10 minutes faster than it did, but instead, Pain Gaming found more than one avenue to delay it. Then G2 should have allowed them to happen. My MVP for this game is Caps, who continues to be all business and no play. This is round 0-0 of the Swiss stage. Pain Gaming, the first seed of the CBLOL, versus G2 Esports, the first seed of the LEC. Shock and surprise. Well, not that surprised. Bitty demonstrate why they are one of the favorites of the tournament with some incredible early game macros, micros, coordination, and proper read on their win conditions, but they regularly overcommit, hold strange target selection, and avoid playing the map around the mid-game, allowing so much space for their opponents to come back, which isn't how they usually play, and it kind of acts just a little bit strange. Now, LNG, for their end, have the inverse issue, with some strange priority and bizarre macro plays in the early game, but something in the mid to late game clicks. The target selection, and especially disruption during their skirmishes mixed with some high tempo, control, and solid ballooning of leads means that we have an LNG squad making an upset that was unexpected, but a little expected knowing the history of these two teams. My MVP for this game is Hung, who disrupted Bitty in so many hilarious ways. This was round 1-0 of the Swiss stage. Bitty Gaming, the first seed of the LPL, versus LNG Esports, the third seed of the LPL. Bizarrely sloppy on both sides. Now, top esports find themselves consistently reacting instead of being proactive, which is the only thing I find to be of major concern here. Because their coordination, macro approach, vision play, and neutral play were really solid. Even as to say that when their skirmishing was in play, it was a little bit stronger at some moments. Now that said, Gen G still held control of the pace and tempo of the game with each proactive step, with excellent neutrals, macro plays, and coordinations. It was more than an expected win out of them. Now, granted, the overzealousness and overaggression is noted in this game, and if not corrected, could be some minor issues going forward, but the pacing of this game showed that there was some strong correcting when it was needed. My MVP for this game is Pace, who was a skirmishing monster. This was round 1-0 of the Swiss stage. Top Esports, the second seed of the LPL, versus Gen G, the second seed of the LCK. Now, there is such thing as giving a little bit too much space. G2 suffer from more of their early game woes, allowing their opponents so much space to control the pace of the game, how neutrals are approached, and the state of each skirmish. Now that said, when it came down to it, they knew their own win conditions and had some incredible comebacks in the mid to late game, but it only means that they were going to be playing on the back foot the entire time. Life Esports, for their part, continued to play the best early game we see, with some coordination, macros, and so on and so forth. But they slow the game down for some reason, getting behind in levels and gold, which they managed to squeak the win here, but it was very messy and in a way that they might not get away with against stronger teams moving forward. My MVP for this game is Zeka for how much his scaling contributed to Life's victory. This was round 1-0 of the Swiss stage. G2 Esports, the first seed of the LEC, versus Life Esports, the first seed of the LCK. If at first you don't succeed, Team Liquid baffled me during this game. Their early game approach, it was nowhere to be seen, and it's not to trade in for a better late game either. They still managed some solid macro, good coordination, and a great read on the win conditions of both sides to properly punish Weibo for their overaggression, but this was so much given away to play on the back foot of an already delicate matchup. Weibo Gaming pull out an expected win from some strong early gameplay, coordination, late game skirmishing, and overall great control of the tempo, but these weird micro errors, macro errors, overzealousness is costing them more and more, making it hard to be convinced that this team can convincingly make it out of Swiss stage. My MVP for this game is Breathe for the relentless pressure he applied at all stages. This was round 0-1 of the Swiss stage. Team Liquid Honda, the second seed of the LCS, versus Weibo Gaming, the fourth seed of the LPL. Any other result in any other way would have been bizarre. Pain Gaming managed a lot of solid early game answers and adaptations to neutrals and skirmishing, but this is really a matter of skill difference on a large scale, and we can't really fault them for how the game turned out. T1, for their part, played as expected with some strong early game ballooned leads, incredible coordination, some bizarre micro errors here and there, but mostly a lot of strong macro plays as a whole. T1 needed to show that this could be done at the very minimum and as dominant as it should have been, and it was delivered for this game. Now it's only a matter to see if they can show that they can play against and win against potential top 8 teams going forward. My MVP for this game is Grubby, who just steamrolled Pain in this particular game. This was round 0-1 of the Swiss stage, Pain Gaming, the first seed of the CBLOL, versus T1, the fourth seed of the LCK. You could stand for it to be a little cleaner. FlyQuest failed to pull off the adaptation needed in this game. From the early game lack of respect to the lane swap and the consistent contest without resources, and they managed to almost nail the coffin at that point. But their coordination, skirmishing, neutral approach, and macros, especially around the mid game, was really excellent, punishing a down 1 or D+ that should have been a lot cleaner. Now, speaking of D+, their early game continues to be excellent, and their mid to late game continues to be questionable, which is saying a lot given how strong their pressure was in the early game. It should have been an easy game to just coast and close, but they still show signs of strong ballooning, neutral approach, and coordination, but these micro and macro errors in the mid to late game stages really need to be fixed. My MVP in this game is Aiming, who was the most consistent player by far here. This is round 1-0 of the Swiss stage, FlyQuest, the first seed of the LCS, versus D+ Kia, the third seed of the LCK. That's a lot of risks to take for such a delicate game. Now, GAM Esports finds some very strong early macro and coordination within their skirmishes to hold the lead and run their opponent around the map. Now, it's too bad that that momentum stalled and floundered, making any attempts at ballooning leads inexistent. If they want to stay in this tournament, something has to change with how they play with the particular momentum. Now, Fnatic, for their part, are not much better. While their late game macros, neutrals, and skirmishing is excellent, so much of the game was out of their control, leading to some very overeager, zealous, and aggressive plays that a better team would have turned into an easy victory against them, but this game was not great in many aspects for either of these teams. My MVP of this series is Noah for the amount of map and skirmishing pressure he applied all around. This was round 0-1 of the Swiss stage, GAM Esports, the first seed of the VCS, versus Fnatic, the second seed of the LEC. It's good to stick to your strengths there. Mad Lions find themselves opting for a draft and never playing to that style ever, which is a little confusing. There's some solid coordination and approach to neutrals, and not much in terms of errors made, but the absolute lack of proactivity and agency from the team is a little baffling. And I hope it doesn't happen again if they want to stay in the game or just the tournament in general. Now, the talents, for their part, played some very clean League of Legends. Solid macros, neutrals, visions, coordination, so on and so forth, all of it. They ballooned leads and clearly understood their win conditions, and which means that they move on in this particular series, in spite of the fact that this is a rematch against the team that they lost to. So it's a little awkward to evaluate how they go from here, either of these teams. But this is what they look like going forward. The Talons will look fantastic for their games that await them. My MVP for this game is Maple, as no one could really stop him other than his own hubris. This was round 0-1 of the Swiss stage, Mad Lions Koi, the third seed of the LEC, versus Paris Saint-Germain Talents Esports, the first seed of the PCS. Congrats to LNG on making it to the bracket stage. D+ feel a little disappointing in this series. There are moments of brilliance with some strong macro plays, a spattering of solid skirmishing, and some really good adaptation. Game 2, especially in the early game, looked like the D+ we expected to see, but the lack of overall proactivity, really strange target selections, and strange micros left them looking a little underwhelming. For LNG, this was an incredible set of games from them. Superb read on their win conditions and that of their opponents, with some great pace and tempo control. Honestly, some of the strongest plays from them I've seen in a while, and a well-deserved qualification to the next round. Now, that said, I have some concerns, from strange skirmishing approaches to inconsistent neutral approach. I can see a stronger early game team shutting them down before they get the chance to really ramp up to a position that they are comfortable with. But as it is, no one has done it yet. My MVP for this series is Scout for how much space he created for his team and how well he shut down Showmaker's approach. This was round 2-0 of the Swiss stage, D plus Kia, the third seed of the LCK, versus LNG Esports, the third seed of the LPL. Congrats to Gen G on qualifying to the bracket stage. Hamo Life have incredible coordination, sense of their win conditions, proactivity, and overall a well-organized team. This series especially showing how well they took advantage of the mistakes from their opponents to swing the momentum around and balloon the leads that were needed. But this time they never found any leverage in the early game, and I think this has more to do with how strong Gen G were this go around than their lack of attempts to hold control. As Gen G not only controlled the early game, but all stages of the game around neutrals, map, and with some strong macro and wave manipulation, and solid adaptation from game to game. My minor complaint are the strange micro errors that came through out of Gen G, as they often ended up easily corrected in this particular stakes, that it didn't really strike me as a larger concern this time. There is a reason that both of these teams are favorites to this tournament, and just how much scarier Gen G is overall. My MVP of this series is Canyon for how much he set up his team for success in pressuring the early game. This was round 2-0 of the Swiss stage, Hamo Life Esports, the first seed of the LCK, versus Gen G, the second seed of the LCK. Sometimes you need to know when to cut your losses. Fnatic find a lot of proactivity, vision play, decent coordination during the early to mid-game stages of the game, and that's about it. Much of their read on their win conditions were kind of off. Overzealousness and over-aggression took them over, and at no point were there proper plays found from them. Some course correction is needed if they want to stay in the Swiss stage, but oh boy. Now, Top Esports, for their part, are calm, cool, and collected. Strong early game and around neutrals, macro approaches, and their win conditions. They were proactive and properly punished the plays that Fnatic overstepped. There are some micro errors here and there, but otherwise unimportant to the scope of this particular game. We'll see if such dominance comes back from them in games to come, but for now, this is excellent. My MVP of this game is Cream, as Fnatic had no answer for his plays. This was round 1-1 of the Swiss stage. Fnatic, the second seed of the LEC, versus Top Esports, the second seed of the LPL. Some of the best skirmishing around. Bitty show us some incredible macro and skirmishing coordination, some of the best vision play around, and a strong read on their win conditions. There are moments of micro errors, but this game was so close that I don't fault them at all regarding them, and it was almost everything correct from them. That said, T1 are just something else this time. Their early game skirmishing, neutral control, macro play, heck, actually at all stages of the game, T1 managed to find so much control and tempo. There's just some strange overzealousness from moments and micro errors that are still a little concerning, but when push comes to shove, this team manages some incredible feats here. It also helps that they are drafting sensibly instead of overcomplicating their situation. My MVP for this game is Zeus, whose macro and skirmishing impact was huge. This is round 1-1 of the Swiss stage. Bitty Gaming, the first seed of the LPL, versus T1, the fourth seed of the LCK. High tempo versus scaling. And scaling seems pretty good here. Now, the Talons as a whole played with a lot of coordination, early game neutral setups, and overall solid macro around their win conditions. Now, the issue comes along with the pace of the game. Now, there's playing slow to avoid overversing errors, and playing so slow your opponent scales to their win conditions. Those are two very different things at that point. And if the Talons really want to move forward, their tempo play needs to improve. Now, while FlyQuest, on their hand, holding a very strong scaling composition, play exactly to the pace that they needed for their win conditions. With a lot of solid coordination, neutral plays, and approach to their win conditions meant that buying time works this time. I'm a little bit concerned as to what will happen for them against stronger teams who play more aggressively and with stronger early games, but as it is now, it's a solid, clean game from them. My MVP for this game is Masu for the 2 quadra kills he ended up getting. This was the 1-1 round of the Swiss stage. Paris Saint-Germain Talents Esports, the first seed of the PCS, versus FlyQuest, the first seed of the LCS. There's some bizarre slow burns here. Weibo Gaming came to us with an inconsistency once more. While the coordination and approach to win conditions is fairly solid, combined with some of the proactivity, it allowed them a lot of avenues to contest every given play. But they never held control of the tempo, or even adapted their play to the state of the game. And something absolutely needs to change about their approach, or they may find themselves eliminated from play unceremoniously. G2, for their part, play an exceptional early game, which is fairly unusual for them. But from it, and their excellent macro, coordination, neutral approach, and ballooning, we got to see a G2 that we usually don't get to see at all for a long time. And if they keep it up and continue this kind of level of play, they might get a chance to properly qualify for the bracket stage. My MVP for this game is Broken Blade, who just zoned and shut down any approach that Weibo had. This was round 1-1 of the Swiss stage. Weibo Gaming, the 4th seed of the LPL, versus G2 Esports, the 1st seed of the LEC. We say goodbye to Mad Lions Koi. Try as they might, and a valiant attempt as it is, the consistency issues persist. You find strong approaches to win conditions, vision, and neutral plays mixed in with some solid proactivity, but there is something to be said about how leads are ballooned and taken advantage of. And game 1, fantastic, no notes. But it's clear they didn't know what to do from games 2 and 3, as their proactivity is not from leads, but just from trying to force mistakes that rarely happen. Now, GAM Esports, for their part, also have some consistency issues, but that's of execution. Early game proactivity, pressure, skirmishing, and approach to win conditions are all there, but once a lead is established, it is hard to tell how much of it will be properly ballooned and how well a game will be closed out. This time around, it was fantastic closers, and frankly, if this form keeps up, a lot more upsets are on the way. My MVP for the series is Levy for how much Mad Lions struggled to shut him down, and how much space it gave the rest of GAM to work with. This was round 0-2 of the Swiss stage. Mad Lions Koi, the 3rd seed of the LEC, versus GAM Esports, the 1st seed of the VCS. We say goodbye to Pain Gaming. Valiant's efforts abound and a very impressive showing from them. As mentioned frequently, the difference here is in skill, but the margins are a lot smaller this time. Some solid coordination and macro play, some fantastic reads on the win conditions, and approach to neutral play. But as the curtain falls, it just isn't enough, with only inches away from each win. If it comes down to those margins against another struggling team, it was bound to happen eventually. Now, speaking of a struggling team, Team Liquid played to a similar level, but this time their macro just wasn't to the level we expect from them. A lot of micro errors than usual, and what seems slightly disjointed play. Their coordination and neutral approaches was solid enough to properly contest and keep up at the moments, but the lack of ability to properly balloon leads against a team that most expected to be an easy win is something concerning, and their play needs to be polished significantly if they want to stay in the Swiss stage, let alone qualify for the bracket one. My MVP in this series is Jan for his consistently high level of skirmishing. This was round 0-2 of the Swiss stage. Pain Gaming, the 1st seed of the CBLOL, versus Team Liquid Honda, the 2nd seed of the LCS. And we say goodbye to Mad Lions Koi. For some, this will be a little bit of a disappointment for me within the expectations. In fact, actually, they did a little better than I expected. Making it past the play-in stage, mostly because their stats indicated a lot more inconsistency at play. They did pretty okay within the play-in stage, more within the expectations of what the region would perform. Kinda. But within the Swiss stage, it reflected more a lot of the stats. They won one individual game. A convincing game, but only one individual one. And while there is room to say that they drew poorly, did they? They got beaty, which arguably, yes, not a great poll. They are the favorites of the tournament. But then you get Paris Saint-Germain Talents, a team that you've already demonstrated strong showing against, and then lose fairly convincingly. And you get one good game against GAM, within an also play-ins team. So 2 out of the 3 that you pull up against are play-ins teams, and you won a single one out of those and lose the other 3. And this is more along the lines of what I was kind of expecting out of them. Performances that on first review should reflect something solid, but never fully showing up where expected. I commend MDK for their attempts here. It is, quite honestly, to me already way better than expected regarding the, for me, I didn't expect them to make it past play-ins at all. But as a region as a whole, it is not great. Ending up on the 0-3 docket is never a good feeling, especially given the whole taste of it when you go home. You're often not going to remember how you did in the play-ins, in spite of everything else of your struggling year. You're not going to remember how you qualified to Worlds in a system in which, honestly, you probably shouldn't have at all, given like the track record and stats of the other teams that were there. G2 really gave you some grace. You should really thank them. So there's a lot to commend, and they should be happy about the performance to a sense. But I understand that given the spectacle and prestige as expectations of the LEC, this is pretty disappointing in all regards. Not only were your games pretty lackluster, but the one game you did well was in a series in which the games that followed looked pretty bad. So with that, I hope that this team bounces back, restructures, does anything that it needs to revitalize itself. But as it is, pat yourselves on the back for a performance that is above expectations. And we say goodbye to Pain Gaming. Brazil, honestly, you guys should be pumped. You should be proud of these boys. They didn't win a single game. That feels bad. However, they did challenge these teams. They played within close margins of both G2 and Team Liquid. Not at all within T1, but that was kind of expected, and I wouldn't fault them for that. There is a level of pride to the region and their playstyle that demonstrated how close this tournament actually was across the board, especially going up against Team Liquid and how Team Liquid fared overall. It should bring some pause and concerns to many of the regions within the lower half of the Swiss stage expectations. And as is, still reflects a lot of changes that would be needed within the region. I think their style, their aggressive, very proactive, bubbly style is to be loved. But a great amount of refinement is so deeply necessary. So I think it's hard. There's a bittersweetness to it because their play-ins performance is, quite frankly, fantastic. They played better than I expected or that many people expected. Part of it has to do with the draw format, but frankly, part of it doesn't at all. It was very close between R7 and themselves. R7 competed and proved to their mettle against 100 Thieves at all, which was a team that many expected to move out. So I think that there is pride to be existed here. And it feels unfortunate that this is the last time that or any Brazilian team will be able to face off within the banner of the CBLOL. But I think that as the last showing of the CBLOL, this is an excellent one. And let's hope that with the new conference, that Brazilian teams will get the chance to a better sense of progression and coordination, that the North and South Conference situation helps foster cooperation so that the region as a whole is represented better, and if not, that it liars a fire in their stomachs. But otherwise, good job, boys. You did great. And with that, we get one step closer to the next stage. The two teams that have qualified are teams that are well within expectations of the top 8, although LNG is playing significantly better than I expected, but Gen G playing well within the margins. But those are to be explored next week. This week, the thing that I find more interesting is how much the meta regarding drafts and lane swaps are almost not changing as much as we expected. There are still very similar picks across the board that we got from play-ins. There's a little bit more confidence. Heck, picks that are within like the playoff stages of 14-13 to 14-16 are still present and abound. There's not as frequent of like mid lane ADCs, but we still see some Lucians, we still see some Smolders, we still see some Tristanas, especially the Tristanas, and we still see some Ziggs overall. Heck, Smolder top is still within a lineup of the picks. And so I think there's two situations. Either the actual nerfs and changes to turrets and the other marksmen, as well as fleet of footwork, didn't address specifically what was going on that encouraged this kind of play as much. In fact, it only encouraged a slight change in the variety of mid laners. It really didn't do very much in terms of the bot laners, in which I expected a lot more auto attack focused marksmen to show up. Some more Varus's, more Jinxes, more Ashes. But instead, we still are getting our Ezreals. We're still we're getting Kallistas. We're still getting more burst-oriented survival marksmen within the bot side. While the mid lane, our Corkis are still running around just fine. And I think the reason why nothing had been curbed enough is because there's nothing substantial that replaced it. A lot of the buffs that happened, so if I take a look back at patch 14.18, the buffs that were involved were Gnar, expected, Ahri, which was part of the lineup of things that came in, and then none of the other buffs really encouraged anything. We got some Jaces, we got maybe a Jinx game, but like not much of the rest of these buffs did anything to really curb anything. The only nerf here that I see that was of significance was the Zeri nerf. That and the Azir nerf. And as a whole, that didn't really amount to much because it doesn't really change how the actual map movement of the game is encouraged. Lane swaps then in of themselves not changed means that certain champions are still prioritized for those kinds of play, and because of it, certain junglers are still best encouraged from it, certain mid laners are still encouraged from it, and the different approaches, I don't know, it doesn't feel strange that like how aggressively they attacked the meta, that it didn't budge. And if you're like old to the scene as I have been, it feels reminiscent to the time they nerfed Lucian 8 times and it still stuck because it didn't address specifically what they were doing to the meta itself. It didn't address how efficiently past the actual resistances that were created in place, how fast it was to easily take down those turrets. It didn't change the fact of how experience in and of itself is shared and changed. It didn't change anything regarding how jungle is like approached. It doesn't change anything in the ways that neutral objectives are approached. In fact, the grubs specifically, I think, are the biggest factors to why I want to see more data specifically, and I may collect more data. I don't know how much time I have for that, but I am almost certain, with such a degree, an emphatic amount of degrees here, that the grubs are strictly the reason why the lane swap meta is as it is. Because you do not team fight as much around them. The ways in which the grubs are done means that there's a lot more map movement that needs to happen, but not as much fervor and priority for it. In situations where it used to be the two heralds, the first herald at 8 minutes is so far past the point of when the first dragon spawns that people aren't encouraged or incentivized as much for it, right? But like, the thing that I find wild here is that the initial spawn of the void grubs is a minute after the Drake. The margin in space. So a 3-minute difference versus a 1-minute difference means that the margin in space is that you're more likely to either trade or have both teams prioritize the same camp at the same time, as opposed to, and it is hard to explain in which how this affects map movement from each team. Suffice to say that because of the high priority and the ways in which turret taking after the actual fall of the resistances in top and mid lane, and the effect that grubs have on the ability to take them, means that there is going to be a lot of focus towards mixing and matching where your priorities are going to go throughout the game. If you think that your team is built not to take those turrets, you're going to focus Drakes and you're going to ignore the mites. If both teams think they're going to be able to take as many turrets as possible, especially during the late game, they're going to want to equalize the mites as possible, or one of them is going to do the minimum to stop it. But it's only going to matter in the second time that they spawn, not the first time. The first time, the team is going to prioritize whichever one is going to be better. Because, it is difficult to very much vocalize without seeing heat maps of jungler movement, and I'm mostly jungler movement during lane swap games and during standard games. If anybody has that data set, I would love to see it. But at this point, I have seen so many games, hundreds of them. I think nearly 1,000 at this point of games, most of which were lane swaps. And you can see the clear difference between the two as when one becomes a dragon-focused game and when it becomes a split game versus when it becomes a void grub game. And I think that next year, if they have any sense to curb lane swapping in the professional scene, void grubs have to go. That is my initial read, at least. And with that, predictions for the rest of the play-ins. Frankly, I am of the belief that my second set of play-in picks for the teams to advance are probably likely really dependent on the draws. But that is like for most people. I am strange to see BDBD being on the lower half of the bracket. But the other teams in the lower half of the bracket, that and Weibo, both BDBD and Weibo being in the lower half of the bracket, surprises me. But one of those two was bound to go, but I honestly thought it was going to be G2 and Weibo, quite frankly. if it was going to be two of the prospective top 8 teams. FlyQuest is doing a lot better, but I think FlyQuest got away with a solid set of draws of teams that they should have been able to beat anyways, and that is going to come crashing down fairly quickly. If they make it further, that is fantastic. Awesome. But my expectations are that there is going to be at least one upset. I don't think anybody's going to have a perfect run within Pickems, but who knows? I honestly actually want to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Who do you think is actually going to be able to get the last 6 slots going forward? As well as, what have been your thoughts regarding how the meta's played out? Is there been any other expectations? What do you think is really keeping the lane swaps all together? Are you happy with the performances of the teams that have been eliminated or disappointed? I'd love to hear your comments of everything and anything in the comments down below. Thank you again, all of you, for watching. I super appreciate it. And I'll see you all again next week when the Swiss stages are done and the bracket stages will have been determined. See you then.